Somewhere in North Carolina, there's a shopping mall that's been sitting dead since the Clinton administration, and the town around it is still politely pretending everything is fine. This is a list of 13 North Carolina towns that got locked in time when their one big industry packed up and left and simply never changed back. There's a chair in one of them 30 feet tall. There's a town whose name is literally made out of factory parts. And there's a village so abandoned, it played a district in the Hunger Games. Hit that like button now because the algorithm is the only thing in this video that isn't stuck in 1975. Picture the Piedmont region of North Carolina in the middle of the 20th century. Cotton mills running around the clock, 3 shifts a day, lights burning through the night, furniture factories stacking chairs to the ceiling faster than trucks could haul them away. Tobacco warehouses so full the sweet, heavy smell hung over entire counties like fog. For about 80 years, this stretch of the American South wasn't sleepy or forgotten. It was the industrial engine of the region, and in some cases, the industrial engine of the entire country. Whole towns were conjured out of red dirt for the single purpose of feeding one factory. The company built the houses. The company built the school. The company built the ball field, the church, and the general store. And then, one factory at a time, it all went quiet. Here's the number that explains this whole video. The state of North Carolina lost roughly 100,000 textile jobs between 1997 and 2002 alone, with another 70,000 gone from apparel in that exact same window. And that was just the final wave. The furniture makers followed the textiles overseas. The tobacco money dried up. The railroads had already thinned out decades earlier. When the one industry that built a town leaves and nothing shows up to take its place, the town doesn't die. That's the thing people get wrong. It doesn't die, it just stops. It freezes exactly as it was on the day the machines went silent, and it stays that way for 50 years while the rest of the country races ahead. That is what we are driving through today. Some of these towns will charm you, a few will genuinely unsettle you, and at least one of them is quietly poisoning its own drinking water while selling you a cheap house with a smile. So keep your eyes open because the bargains and the warnings are frequently the exact same address, 13 of them. Let's start the countdown. Number 13, Reidsville. Up near the Virginia line in Rockingham County, Reidsville is a town that Lucky Strike Cigarettes built. For more than 80 years, the American Tobacco Company ran this place, perfecting the Lucky Strike blend right here while thousands of people clocked in to roll, pack, and ship it out to the world. This was a genuine company town, and tobacco was the whole personality. The entire downtown smelled like cured leaf, and nobody complained, because that smell was the sound of money landing in mailboxes. Then in the mid-1990s, the company sold off, and the tobacco warehouses that had defined the skyline for generations started coming down one by one. Some of them were carefully dismantled so the beautiful old heart pine inside could be reclaimed and resold to people building fancy homes somewhere else. At least one of them didn't go so gracefully and burned in a spectacular fire that lit up the night sky. What's left is a downtown that still looks like the tobacco was rolling yesterday afternoon. The old Grand Theater marquee, the Belvedere Hotel, the 1926 municipal building standing there like it's still waiting for a parade that got canceled. And the prices reflect the deep freeze. You can buy a home here for around $140,000, which in most of America today would get you a nice used truck and not much else. The town motto is, "Live simply, think big," which is either genuinely inspiring or the most honest real estate pitch ever written, depending entirely on your mood that day. Either way, the price tag on the front door does not lie. Number 12, Spencer. Just north of Salisbury sits a town that owes its entire existence to J.P. Morgan and a steam locomotive. In the 1890s, Southern Railway needed a giant repair yard positioned exactly halfway between Washington, D.C., and Atlanta, and a little spot on the map called Spencer is the dot that won the prize. At Ossie High, its wartime peak, 3,000 workers serviced 75 engines and 50 rail cars a day inside the sprawling complex known as the Spencer Shops. The town itself was quite literally sold off in lots to the very men who worked the yard, so your paycheck and your mortgage both traced back to the same railroad. And then the railroad did the one thing nobody in Spencer ever saw coming. It switched from steam power to diesel. Here's why that was a death sentence. Steam engines were temperamental, complicated machines that broke down constantly and needed an army of skilled hands to keep them running. Diesel engines barely broke down at all, so the massive repair yard that fed the entire town suddenly had almost nothing left to repair. By the late 1960s, the shops were closing for good. The town stopped growing at almost the exact moment the last steam engine went cold on the tracks. Today, the 60-acre site is the North Carolina Transportation Museum, home to the Bob Julian Roundhouse, the largest structure of its kind in North America, packed with vintage locomotives that haven't turned a wheel in decades. Kids still press their faces to the fence to watch the old engines. Retired railroad men still wander the grounds, pointing at machines they personally repaired 60 years ago. Walking through Spencer feels like the 1950s simply never ended, and honestly, for around $235,000, you can move into that feeling permanently and never look back. Number 11. Spindale. Some towns are named after saints or founders or a president somebody admired. This one is named after factory parts. Out in the western foothills of Rutherford County, Spindale took its name directly from the spindles that spun the cotton thread, because that is genuinely all this town was ever about, right down to the letters on the welcome sign. The first mill opened in 1916, the town officially incorporated in 1923, and if you drive slowly through the old mill village today, you can read the entire class system of a 1920s textile town just by looking at the houses. The biggest homes sit proudly in the front row, closest to the good streets. Then each row behind them shrinks a little and a little more, until you reach the tiny square boxes in the very back where the lowest paid workers were housed. It's a frozen social hierarchy you can still read from your car window a century later. Then the textiles left, and out here they left brutally. In Rutherford County alone, 19 major layoffs after 1998 dumped more than 5,000 workers onto the unemployment rolls in just a few short years. The last big operation, Stonecutter Mills, closed in 1999 and took the county's heart with it. What survived is a town frozen in the middle of the last century, where the old textile rail line is now a peaceful walking trail, and homes go for around $177,000. If you've made it this far and you're already quietly pricing out a move in your head, do me one small favor and hit that subscribe button, because I go looking for a brand new one of these forgotten bargain towns every single week, and you will not want to miss the next batch. Number 10. Badin. Now this one is strange even by the generous standards of this particular list. In 1913, a French company sailed all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to a quiet spot on the Yadkin River and built an entire aluminum town completely from scratch. When the First World War rudely interrupted their plans, the American giant Alcoa stepped in and took over, and for the next 90 years, Badin's entire reason for existing was making aluminum. And here's the thing that made Badin different. This was good money. Aluminum work paid roughly double what a cotton mill down the road paid, so Badin got the deluxe version of a company town. French-influenced architecture on the streets, a real hospital, a golf course, even a movie theater that in its heyday was reportedly the largest between Richmond and Atlanta, which is not a small stretch of the map. And then in the early 2000s, the smelter shut down, the plant was demolished, and every one of those good-paying jobs simply evaporated into the humid Carolina air. But losing the jobs is not the dark part of Badin's story. The dark part is what got left behind in the ground. Cyanide, fluoride, and other industrial chemicals leached out of old, unlined landfills, seeped into the groundwater, and made their way into Badin Lake. Residents of West Badin, historically the black side of this segregated company town, have spent years demanding a cleanup that keeps almost, but not quite, arriving. So yes, you absolutely can buy a home in Badin for around $160,000. Just maybe ask a few pointed questions about the water quality before you sign anything. That's not a joke, by the way. That is a genuine home inspection recommendation. Number 9. Erwin, down in Harnett County, about 50 minutes south of Raleigh. There's a town that once proudly called itself the denim capital of the world, and it was absolutely not exaggerating to make itself feel important. The Erwin cotton mills, built way back in 1904 by the famous Duke family, cranked out well over 1 million linear yards of denim every single week at capacity. Fun little detail. The town was originally named Duke, after the family that owned it, and then had to rename itself in 1926 to avoid getting hopelessly confused with the brand new Duke University up the road. So the town shrugged, picked the name Erwin after a mill executive, and moved on with its life. That enormous million-square-foot mill complex still dominates the town today. 57 acres of solid brick sitting right in the dead center of everything, impossible to ignore. The mill finally closed its doors in 2000, and for a while it just sat there, empty and silent, the way these giant buildings always seem to. Erwin holds a strange distinction. It was the one town in booming Harnett County that flat out refused to grow while everything around it was exploding with new subdivisions. But here's a small, hopeful twist that most of the towns on this list never get. New investors bought the whole old complex a few years back, and it's now filled with dozens of small businesses breathing life back into the brick. The town still throws its Denim Days festival every single year and runs a history museum staffed by the very people who once worked the looms. Homes run around $210,000, and you're a comfortable drive from both Raleigh and Fort Liberty. Number 8. Roanoke Rapids. Way out in the northeastern corner of the state, hard up against the Virginia border, there's a town where 7 separate cotton mills once ran full tilt, and every single one of them was owned by the same company, J.P. Stevens. The older folks around here will still tell you that in the summertime, before anyone had air conditioning, the mills ran with all the windows thrown open, and loose cotton fibers drifted through the whole town on the breeze, like it was gently snowing in the middle of July. Roanoke Rapids hit its all-time population peak at just under 17,000 people back in the year 2000, and it has shrunk at every single census taken since then. Drive the 2 old commercial districts along Roanoke Avenue today, and you'll find gorgeous, elaborate turn-of-the-century buildings, with the north end noticeably emptier and quieter than the south. Now, most people in America have honestly never heard of Roanoke Rapids by name, but they have absolutely heard its story without knowing it. Back in 1974, a single mother named Crystal Lee Sutton was earning $2.65 an hour folding towels inside the J.P. Stevens plant right here when she led a union drive that made national headlines in what was then the least unionized state in the entire country. Her fight became the basis for the film Norma Ray, that famous, iconic scene where the exhausted woman stands up on a table in the middle of the factory floor and holds up a handmade cardboard sign that just says the single word, union? That moment was born right here on this factory floor. Homes now sell for around $123,000 in one of the poorest counties in America. Number 7. Hamlet. Right in the middle of the state, sitting roughly halfway between Charlotte and Fayetteville, is a town that time didn't just quietly forget. Time lapped it completely. Hamlet was a railroad town in the purest, most old-fashioned sense of the word, incorporated back in 1897, with 5 separate rail lines shooting out of its center like spokes on a giant wheel, which made it one of the single most important junctions in the entire Southeast. Famous passenger trains rolled through here on the daily: the Orange Blossom Special, the Silver Meteor, names that sound like railroad poetry now. The absolute crown jewel of the town is the 1900 Seaboard Passenger Depot, the only Victorian Queen Anne-style railroad station in all of North Carolina, a building so beloved by locals that they spent nearly $12 million to carefully move it and restore it. But by the 1980s and 90s, the railroad had faded into a shadow of itself, and Main Street quietly emptied out storefront by storefront. The grand old Terminal Hotel, once a proud stop for travelers, slid into very hard times. Hamlet has known real deep tragedy in its history too, including a 1991 factory fire that took 25 lives and directly changed workplace safety laws all across the country, a somber chapter that the people here have never once forgotten and never will. On a much lighter note, this quiet little railroad town also happens to be the birthplace of the legendary jazz saxophonist John Coltrane. Today, you can buy a home in Hamlet for around $113,000, right next door to one of the prettiest train depots anywhere in the American South. Number 6. Valdese. Now for something completely wonderfully different from everything else on this list. Out in Burke County, in the western part of the state, there's a town founded in 1893 by immigrants who came all the way from the Cottian Alps of Italy. These weren't just any immigrants. They were members of an ancient Protestant sect called the Waldensians, a group whose faith actually predates the Protestant Reformation itself by centuries. They arrived in the Appalachian foothills of North Carolina and proceeded to build the single largest Waldensian settlement anywhere in the world outside of Italy. And they have never, ever let go of that heritage. The town still runs an 11-acre outdoor museum called the Trail of Faith, complete with 15 replica buildings, including a remarkable stone church built right into the side of a hill. The Old Rock School, constructed out of native fieldstone back in the 1920s, still proudly anchors the downtown as a bustling cultural center. There's a striking 15-foot iron sculpture of a train called The Arrival, and one of the longest-running outdoor dramas in the entire state plays out the immigrants' original journey on stage every single summer. The old Waldensian bakery on Main Street is delightfully still a working bakery to this day. It is genuinely one of the most unusual small towns anywhere in America, an Italian alpine village somehow frozen in the green North Carolina hills, and homes here run around $245,000. Quick favor before we hit the top 5. If you're enjoying this slow ride through America's most beautifully stuck-in-time towns, go ahead and smash that like button right now. It genuinely tells the algorithm to show these forgotten places to more curious people, and trust me, these towns could really use the visitors and the attention. Number 5. Thomasville. In the very heart of North Carolina's furniture belt, sitting right between High Point and Lexington, there is a town so completely committed to its own identity that it built a 30-foot monument to a chair. The Thomasville Chair Company opened its doors in 1904, and by 1916 the town was producing an almost unbelievable 2,000 chairs every single day. So in 1950, the town square proudly received a 30-foot-tall concrete replica of a Duncan Fife armchair big enough to spot from several blocks away, and the locals have affectionately been calling it the Big Chair ever since. There's a genuinely fantastic origin story attached to it, where a Thomasville official allegedly bragged during a business trip that his town had the world's largest chair, and then had to rush back home and actually build the thing to make his boast come true. That's the specific kind of unshakable confidence you can only get from a town that made a solid 5,000 people comfortably rich, selling dining room sets to the whole country. Then, starting in 2001, the furniture manufacturing packed up and moved to China, plant by plant by plant. And as one longtime local business owner bluntly put it, it just left this town high and dry. Today, the old downtown directly across from the Big Chair has its fair share of empty, dusty storefronts, but that chair still stands tall. The freight trains still rumble right through the middle of town, and homes sell for around $236,000, a figure Redfin recently pointed out as nearly half the national average. Number 4. Eden. Here's a town that is, technically speaking, 3 separate frozen towns wearing one big trench coat. Up in Rockingham County, the 3 old mill villages of Leakesville, Spray, and Draper decided to merge together back in 1967 to form a single unified town. And somebody, clearly in a burst of pure optimism, decided to name the whole thing Eden. For decades on end, Eden ran entirely on Fieldcrest mills, cranking out towels, blankets, and those famous high-quality Cariston rugs. In 1979, at the absolute peak, Fieldcrest's profits crested at nearly $25 million. And then came the slow-motion avalanche, in stages, each one landing a little harder. The big sheeting mill closed down after a 1986 merger, moved all its work away to another town that appears on this very list. Then another mill closed in 1999. Then the last cotton mill went dark in 2001. Then the final textile jobs vanished entirely in 2003. Even the large brewery that came to town later on eventually shut its doors in 2015. The old Draper Mill Village, in the plain-spoken words of the State Folklife Institute, has yet to recover to this day. And truly nothing captures that deep freeze quite like the Eden Mall, built with such high hopes in 1980, which slowly emptied out through the late 90s and became a genuine, echoing, honest-to-goodness dead mall. One of those eerie places where the fountains sit dry and your footsteps bounce off the empty tile. You can buy a home in Eden for around $124,000. It is one of the cheapest small cities in the entire state, for reasons that are equal parts genuinely sad and completely understandable. Number 3. Cooleemee. If what you really want is the single most perfectly preserved cotton mill town in all of North Carolina, then you drive southwest out of Winston-Salem to a tiny village of barely 1,000 people that calls itself, with a completely straight face, the mill town that never closed. Cooleemee grew up around a cotton mill perched on the South Yadkin River starting around 1901, and at its bustling peak, roughly 1,800 people worked inside that mill. The town square once had absolutely everything a person could possibly need without ever leaving the village: a department store, a drugstore, a cafe, a public library, and even a proper movie theater. The mill workers were so tight-knit they even fielded their own baseball team, the wonderfully named Cooleemee Cools, complete with a lighted field and a real grandstand for the crowds. And then in 1969, the mill closed for good. But here's exactly what makes Cooleemee so special and so eerie. Roughly 330 of the original mill houses are still standing right where they were built. The whole place genuinely looks like the workers just stepped out for their lunch break one afternoon and simply never came back to finish the shift. The 1905 Mill House Museum is preserved right down to the furniture in the rooms, and the town even opened the very first public museum in the state dedicated entirely to cotton mill village life. The mayor himself doubles as the town historian and personally runs the museum. Property values here sit at around $144,000, making Cooleemee quite possibly the cheapest fully intact time capsule you can legally move into anywhere in America. Now, before we get to the top 2 towns on this list, let me be completely straight with you for a second here, because this channel is built on honesty just as much as it's built on finding you a bargain. A dirt cheap home in a frozen town is a very real opportunity, but a freeze always cuts in both directions. Those low jaw-dropping prices usually exist for a reason, and that reason is that the good jobs left town right along with the industry. So if you're seriously chasing one of these places, come rolling in with a remote job locked down, a solid pension, or a real concrete plan, and not just a big dream in a rented moving truck. If that kind of honest, no-nonsense breakdown is exactly the reason you're here watching this, then go ahead and subscribe, because plenty of other channels out there will only ever sell you the pretty dream and skip the fine print. Now back to the countdown, and to the one single town on this entire list that flatly refused to stay frozen. Number 2. Kannapolis. Every other town on this list is fundamentally a story about what happens when the industry leaves and nobody ever comes to help pick up the pieces. Kannapolis is the great exception, and that is precisely the reason it's ranked so high in our countdown. Founded in 1906, this town was essentially owned outright, lock, stock, and barrel, by Cannon Mills. And by 1914, it had become the single largest producer of sheets and towels on the entire planet. At its towering height, more than 23,000 people worked inside that one enormous mills. Kannapolis was actually the biggest unincorporated community in the whole country until it finally officially incorporated as a real town in 1984. And then came the single darkest afternoon in the entire history of North Carolina labor. In 2003, the mill's owner, a company called Pillowtex, went bankrupt, and in one brutal day, it laid off 7,650 people. That was and remains the largest one-day layoff the state of North Carolina had ever seen. The mill itself, a building physically larger than the Pentagon, was imploded in a cloud of dust in 2006, its towering smokestacks blown to rubble. That really should have been the sad end of the entire story, just like all the others. But instead, a billionaire named David Murdoch bought the entire ruined site and poured a staggering $1.5 billion into building a gleaming science and research campus right on top of the old mill's footprint. Downtown Kannapolis now has a shiny minor league baseball stadium whose team, in an absolutely perfect bit of dark local humor, is proudly named the Cannonballers. Homes here run around $300,000 now, noticeably more than the others on this list, and that's precisely because this is what a frozen town actually looks like after somebody finally works up the nerve to hit the thaw button. And number 1, Mount Airy. Of course it's Mount Airy. It could only ever be Mount Airy, because this is the one town that got so incredibly famous for being frozen in time that it cleverly turned the freeze itself into the entire local economy. Tucked into the rolling foothills near the Virginia line, Mount Airy is the real-life hometown of the beloved actor Andy Griffith, and the direct, undeniable inspiration for the fictional small town of Mayberry from the Andy Griffith Show. And here's the genius move. Instead of desperately pretending to be a sleek, modern town like everybody else, Mount Airy leaned all the way into the nostalgia fantasy with both feet. You can sit down and eat at Snappy Lunch, a genuine diner that's been open since 1923, famous far and wide for its enormous fried pork chop sandwich, and notably the only actual real-world business ever mentioned by name on the television show. You can walk in and get a haircut at Floyd's City Barbershop. You can even take a guided tour of the whole town riding in a replica 1960s squad car that launches right out of Wally's service station, a real original 1937 Gulf station, still standing proudly on the corner. There's a whole Andy Griffith Museum, a classic Mayberry soda fountain, and a couple of old pharmacies with original marble soda counters, where the fizz has been flowing continuously since the 1920s. And just up the road, the real Pilot Mountain conveniently doubles as the show's fictional Mount Pilot. This is a town that took its own deep nostalgia, carefully bottled it, and then sold it right back to the entire world. And against all odds, it genuinely works. Mount Airy perfectly proves the strange, quiet truth sitting at the very center of this entire list. Being frozen in time is not always a tragedy to be pitied. Sometimes, if you're clever enough about it, it's the whole entire point. So there they are, 13 North Carolina towns where the 20th century somehow never fully checked out and went home. And when you finally line all of them up side by side, the pattern behind them becomes absolutely impossible to miss. These places did not fail because the people living in them were lazy, or because the towns themselves were badly built or poorly planned. Far from it. They froze because America collectively decided, somewhere across the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, that it was simply cheaper to make our towels and our denim and our furniture on the other side of the world. Whole towns had been carefully built around a single, unspoken promise, and when that promise quietly moved overseas on a container ship, the towns just stopped dead mid-sentence and stayed frozen exactly that way. Some of them, like Mount Airy and Valdese, cleverly turned the freeze into charm and tourism dollars. Some, like Kannapolis, fought and clawed their way all the way back to life. And some, like Eden and Roanoke Rapids, are still standing quietly out there in the cold, patiently waiting for someone to finally notice their beautiful bones and their genuinely shocking low prices. If you happen to be the specific kind of person who looks at a $120,000 Main Street and feels a jolt of pure opportunity instead of sadness, then these towns were basically built and preserved just for you. So now go ahead and do both the algorithm and these forgotten little towns one last favor. Like this video, subscribe for a brand new one of these deep dives every single week, and then tell me down in the comments exactly which frozen town you'd genuinely pack up and move to tomorrow. I promise you I'll personally read every single one of them. See you all in the next frozen little town.